Yesterday, Kamala Harris did something that Donald Trump is just completely incapable of. She did a combative interview. Now, of course, Donald Trump can't answer hard questions, but that isn't what Kamala Harris was asked. Kamala Harris was asked gotcha questions by Brett Baier with unfair and really illegitimate framings on the things that Donald Trump has said and what his administration has done in the past. We expected that to be the nature of the interview, given the fact that it is the Fox propaganda outlet. No matter how much anyone wanted to say that Brett Baier is a real journalist, we knew that he would follow orders of his bosses at Fox and try to skew the interview, and that's what he did. But Kamala Harris still came out on top. And of course, that drove Donald Trump, that drove Fox, that drove all the Trump stooges absolutely crazy. But things just got worse for them and better for Kamala Harris, because we learned that in that interview, Brett Baier lied. Yes, it's not shocking to us that there was some lying going on at the Fox propaganda network, but what should shock us is that Brett Baier just admitted on national television to those lies in the interview, and it's driving MAGA crazy, and we are going to get into all of that. But before we do, if I could quickly ask you to leave a like on this video and hit that subscribe button if you enjoy our channel and want to be a part of what we're growing here. Now, before we get into what Brett Baier had to say about his lie in the interview, I think we need to check out another admission that he made last night following it.
I actually think this is a different take. I think she had a mission that she wanted to do, and maybe she wanted to have a viral moment. She wanted to have a pushback. She came to Fox News and she wanted to have a go after Donald Trump viral moment that plays on a lot of other channels and on social media. And I think she may have gotten that.
Now, before we get into what Brett Baier admitted about his interview with Kamala Harris and the misrepresentation of Donald Trump that went on during it, I think it was important to play that clip because he knows, Brett Baier, along with everyone else at Fox, along with everyone else in MAGA world, that Kamala Harris was incredibly successful in that interview. It's why they were melting down. It's why they're doing everything they possibly can to try to frame it in some bad way, but really just failing to do so, because Kamala held her own, because when she was hit with gotcha questions, she was able to hold her ground and respond. And the most important example of that came when Brett Baier played a clip misrepresenting Donald Trump, of course, when he was talking about his enemies from within comment. Kamala Harris perfectly responded. So before we get into Brett Baier's lie, we got to take a look at this for context.
The question to the former president today, Harris Faulkner had a town hall, and this is how he responded.
I heard about that. They were saying I was like threatening. I'm not threatening anybody. They're the ones doing the threatening. They do phony investigations. I've been investigated more than Alphonse Capone. He was the greatest gangster. No, it's true. No, but think of it. It's called weaponization of government. It's a terrible thing.
So,
Brett, I'm sorry, and with all due respect, that clip was not what he has been saying about the enemy within that he has repeated when he's speaking about the American people. That's not what you just showed.
Well, he was asked about that specific...
No, that's not what you just showed. In all fairness and respect to you,
that was the question that we asked him.
You didn't show that, and here's the bottom line. He has repeated it many times, and you and I both know that. And you and I both know that he has talked about turning the American military on the American people. He has talked about going after people who are engaged in peaceful protest. He has talked about locking people up because they disagree with him. This is a democracy. And in a democracy, the President of the United States, in the United States of America, should be willing to be able to handle criticism without saying he'd lock people up for doing it. And this is what is at stake, which is why you have someone like the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff saying what Mark Milley has said about Donald Trump being a threat to the United States of America.
He's quoted in the Bob Woodward book that way, yes. Let me ask you this, Madam Vice President. You call Donald Trump...
The significance of that.
You call Donald Trump...
Now, of course, we know that is not the full clip. Of course, Kamala Harris knew that that was not the full clip, and it was a complete misrepresentation of Donald Trump. And that's, of course, what Trump stooges, the Fox propaganda network, always do. Donald Trump says something, they try to spin it to act like it's not as crazy, not as unhinged, it's not an attack on our democracy, when in fact, we know that is exactly what it is. Donald Trump has been talking about the enemies from within who he wants to go after for almost a week at this point, and that's why Kamala Harris called out Brett Baier. And now, Brett Baier is calling out Brett Baier because in what was the biggest gotcha moment of the night, Brett Baier had to admit he was wrong and he lied. Let's take a look at that.
Harold, I did make a mistake, and I want to say that mistake. When I called for a soundbite, I was expecting a piece of the enemy from within, from Maria Bartiromo's interview, to be tied to the piece from your town hall, Harris, where you asked the former president about the enemy from within. It just had the piece about the town hall, and just take a listen to what I meant to roll.
I think the bigger problem is the enemy from within, not even the people that have come in and destroying our country. We have some sick people, radical left lunatics, and I think they're and it should be very easily handled by, if necessary, by National Guard, or if really necessary, by the military. They were saying I was like threatening. I'm not threatening anybody. They're the ones doing the threatening. They do phony investigations. I've been investigated more than Alphonse Capone. He was the greatest gangster. No, it's true. No, but think of it. It's called weaponization of government. It's a terrible thing.
My point is that we asked him the question about that sentence and what he was trying to mean.
So Brett Baier admitting to his mistake, or is he really? Now, I don't want to get into conspiracies here, but there's really one of two ways that this could have gone. The first one is that Brett Baier is telling the truth, that they got the wrong clip. For some reason, they didn't review it before showing it to the Vice President of the United States. That seems a little absurd to me, that Brett Baier didn't actually review his clip before his interview, but it's a possibility. The other is that Brett Baier knows just how poorly that interview went for him. He knows how well Kamala Harris did. He knows how embarrassing it was for him to try to sane wash that insane clip from Donald Trump, and so he's trying to walk it back. He's trying to cover it up. And I think that that might be a realistic possibility of what actually happened. Now, again, I don't want to get into conspiracies, but you can let me know what you think, because it seems just a little bit fishy. Because Donald Trump has been making so many of these comments, so many of these insane statements, it would be a little fishy if this isn't actually what they wanted. One of those comments that was made by Donald Trump that's getting called out a lot was his comments on January 6th, and Jessica Tarlov had a perfect takedown of those.
He calls January 6th now a day of love. We have moved from, we should move on from January 6th to this was a day of love. And what I found perhaps the most interesting was that he kept saying we to encompass him and the insurrectionists. So now he's on that team.
They're not insurrectionists.
The tourists. The tourists with zip ties. He says we, and he's now called them hostages, which is a very strange...
Keep playing the Jan 6 card.
Okay, I will. But this came from someone who had supported him. This isn't about Jessica Tarlov hates Donald Trump.
I don't know how we've gotten to the revisionist history point of January 6th, that now it is a day of love when lives were lost, Capitol police officers were injured, people were fearing for their lives. I don't know how we've allowed it to get to this. We cannot allow it to get to this point. And that is why Jessica Tarlov and in this next clip, Kamala Harris are calling out what Donald Trump is saying.
Now, we here know January 6th was a tragic day for our country. It was a day of terrible violence with attacks on law enforcement. 140 law enforcement officers were injured that day. Law enforcement officers were killed that day. And what did Donald Trump say last night about January 6th? He called it, quote, a day of love. And we are all clear. The American people are exhausted with his gaslighting. Exhausted. Enough. Enough.
We cannot allow them to try to rewrite the history of that day. We cannot allow them to pretend that it was some tourist visit, that it was some peaceful display of discontent. No, it was Donald Trump sending a violent mob to try to attack the Vice President of the United States and intimidate elected officials into changing the results of an election and throwing out the will of millions of Americans who cast their ballots. That's what it was. That is the only thing it was, and that is the only way we can remember it. We cannot let Donald Trump continue to push these lies, and we can't let him push any lies, like one that he's telling about IVF that Kamala Harris called out here.
And now, I mean, it just gets more unbelievable sometimes. And now the man calls himself the father of IVF? I mean, what does that... even mean? And all of that, well, he is the one who, by the way, is responsible for it being at risk in the first place. And what is sadly interesting, I think, is that when you listen to Donald Trump talk, it becomes increasingly clear, I think, he has no idea what he's talking about.
Give me a break. Ugh, are we serious here? Father of IVF? Really? And I think Kamala Harris is so perfect in framing this. It's not just that he's a pathological liar. Sure, we know that. He's lost his mind. He doesn't actually know what he's talking about. And I think that may resonate with voters more so than even just calling Donald Trump a liar. They know he's a liar. He's been a liar his whole life. But losing his mind, of course, he's never really been stable up there. But at this point, it's more disastrous than ever. It's more unstable than ever. It's more dangerous than ever. And we got to call that out. And you better believe we're going to be calling it out on this show every single day. And if you want to support that, as always, you can hit that subscribe button. You can leave a like on this video. And if you stuck around to the end, you can drop a blue heart in the comments. And until next time, I'll see you soon.